Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, Proactive Time Management, Solving Tomorrow's Issues Today, presented by the Head of Leadership and Development here at New Horizons, Dr. Jay Pugh. We are in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A portion after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today, so without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Dr. J.
Hey, thanks, Mariella. I appreciate it greatly. And folks, thank you so much for having me. As Mariella said, I'm our head of leadership and development for Educate 360. I've been in this space closer to about 16 years now. It's been quite a bit. So we've been in this rodeo for a long time. And so I really have a passion for the leadership and development space. I'm so glad to see as people are continuing to make their way in. I truly do want to welcome you to today's webinar on solving tomorrow's problems today. That is a real big thing that I want us to understand, because sometimes we find that we're in sort of this space of firefighting, or we're in this space of, hey, I got to constantly put out this and put this fire out, put this fire out. And so when do we get that time to be able to make meaning for ourselves in the way that we approach? So in this case, for those that might not know, I've been in this space now for probably about 7-8 years. I am an author in the space of strategic engagement and online, and I mean online as in the remote live sort of environment that we're in right now. And then I am a hashtag girl dad. I do have 4 daughters that I also have to strategically engage as well. And so prioritization is a very, very important thing, and I'm happy to share some tricks with you along the way. And so I want to ask you sort of a question right out the gate, is sort of, as how many of you, by either an emoji, if you can throw an emoji in there of some kind, or if you can hit a quick hand raiser, how many of you, first of all, manage remotely, that you are in either a hybrid or in a fully virtual environment? Good. And I'm seeing some thumbs up coming in. Wow, quite a few hands being raised. Woo! Wow. Okay, quite a few. Quite a few. Excellent. Is there anybody that is like, no, we are 100% in the office? If you are, do me a favor and put no. Just type no. There is no work from home. Very good to know on that side too, because it is good to see this from a couple different ways, because in some cases, there are certain people that they've made the full transition back into the office. There are those that are still handling things remotely. Sorry about that, folks. I think I might have got disconnected for just a moment. But I just wanted to mention that whether we are working remotely or whether we are working in a space that is hybrid, or if we're working fully on site, what ends up happening is we run into a little bit of a challenge with how do we find enough time to make sure that we have for people, our processes, and our tasks as well. And sometimes that's a real challenge. So that's going to leave me a little bit more of, without looking at this fully from a remote standpoint, what are you finding are the biggest roadblocks of managing in general? What are some of the biggest challenges, especially as it ties to your time? What are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing? Missing body language, working with people, a lot of time spent in email. Focus, I'm seeing. Motivation. Yeah, sometimes it's self-motivation from Alexis. I like that. Communication gets missed, right? And that's sometimes where it comes into too, is that we run into sort of informal sort of check-ins, or we might have distractions when we're in the office. There might be a lot more drop-ins, drop-bys, drive-bys, if you will, in those cases. And one of the key things one of the key things that I'm seeing from that sort of dynamic is this challenge of really understanding that we might be sometimes missing workloads. How do we manage our workload, their workloads, How do we manage our approaches and their approaches? It gets to be somewhat tiresome and exhausting in those cases when it occurs. And so, what I want to start understanding is really the ways of when we are in sort of this, oh, Stephen, really like the idea of transferring ownership, right? How do we transfer ownership? One of the biggest things in more of a hybrid or a remote workforce where we have a little bit more disadvantage even now today in the face-to-face when we're talking about drive-bys is that we sort of enable what is known as reactive behavior. And I don't want us to think that like we are doing this poorly or this is in a space of, hey, we're doing something wrong, because we're certainly not. The dynamics of the workforce over the last 3 to 4 years, we were allowed previously to be a little bit more reactive in our approaches. Meaning, ready? If somebody has a problem, they could come to you, knock on your door, have a quick communication, or if you were working remotely, they could ping you, immediately get back, no problem there. And so what happened is that it can create more of a reactive environment of the way that we worked. What ends up happening, though, is we create sort of this out of sight, out of mind mentality. How many of you can probably agree and see that there might be a little bit of certain opportunities that might be a little bit more out of sight, out of mind? This may look like check-ins. This may look like time to plan. It might look like your own focus time. And what I mean by that is, do you know what? How many of us proactively schedule our focus time in advance before other people start scheduling us for things? How many of us are like, maybe I could do a little more? See, and sometimes it's we did, and then we went there, or we allow others to book over our focus time. We end up removing it. Sometimes we don't have time to. Partially starts to come in. The reason why this is from a behavioral and a psychological construct is because the remote workforce, regardless of what has happened, has pushed us into somewhat of a reactive state. And Alyssa, I love that you bring up the idea of fires, right? Of fires, is that we prioritize things that might be important and then we move it for other things and other people. So what we have to start looking at is flipping this on its axis a little bit and saying, you know what? Maybe we got to start looking at a little bit of a proactive method. How do we sort of get back to a stasis of proactivity and really make it connective in our approach? So how do we anticipate potential needs, concerns, issues? And I will give you an example. I've been in our VP and now head of leadership states for now probably the past 2+ years. And how many of you truly pride yourselves, and I used to do this myself, so this is why I bring this up. How many of you truly pride yourselves in availability? Meaning that I pride in trying to make myself available for others. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, and if that's part of the job requirement, Shauna, then that's brilliant, right? And I see that A typed, is too much because sometimes being all available, right? What's the challenge with always trying to make ourselves available? I'm seeing that it comes back to bite me. This is huge. Why? Why is that? Number one, there's expectations. Sometimes we can't get our own work done. Sometimes there's no time for self. Sometimes there could be a taking for granted. We get it all on our plate because nobody else is available. Our minds aren't designed to multitask. You're absolutely right, Michael. Frequent interruptions, focus time. And Jerry, I really like this, is that quality can sometimes suffer in these cases. And so what we do is Derek brings up a point that he typed to the hosts and panelists I want to share is the reward for doing good work is more work. And so I want to share my first tidbit of what I find to be important as far as more you get into leadership, the more that I find this to be important. And promise you that I have no shame in my game in sort of sharing this. I don't like, I don't put any sort of notes up front on what my calendar looks like. But I'm going to tell you that this week, as I pull this up for you all, this is what weeks look like. And I mean it. This is what weeks look like. It can be daunting. It can be exhausting. It can be, do I have enough time for who this needs to be? How do I make sure that things are being put into where they need to be? How do we make that work and sort right and share, right? And it does. And so part of this that really requires this is you have to find what your proactive method is. Jeff, I know I'm slacking, man. You saw those couple things that are there, right? But in all honesty, folks, the one thing I've learned the higher and higher up you go in leadership is you can't always be available for people. You can't. But you can always make sure that when you are available, you are 100% visible. And I mean that with every fiber of my being. I know Mariella is on this call. If Mariella ever needs to schedule a meeting with me, she gets something on my calendar. She is the only person that will exist on the planet for that time. And that is where we really want to start stressing there's a key difference between availability and visibility. Visibility doesn't have to mean a 45-minute touch base. It could mean I want to maximize the 10 minutes that I have with you to make you know how important you are to what we're doing. And so I want us to really start looking at this from a stasis of visibility and not solely availability. Because here's going to be a very painful question. And hit an emoji here if this hits you on this kind. Ready for this? If you were on your team, would you be taken care of? Meaning that if Catherine was on Catherine's team, if Jeff was on Jeff's team, would you be taken care of too? This is what we're hoping to see. We want to make sure, right? And everyone is always first. And if that happens to where if you're like, well, no, I'm spending all of this time taking care of everybody else, but I'm not taking care of me in this, am I really prioritizing the time to be most effective? So this sometimes is a heavy question, right? And that's where it is. That's what we want to start considering is how we start making sure that we are also members of our team. So that leads me to the following. Does your day run you or do you run your day? How do you currently plan out days, projects, things like that? How do you currently map and plan those out? Good. I like that there's a 50-50 component, Lynette. Sometimes no planning just happens, jotting down notes, tons of lists. Cassandra says, wait, we're supposed to plan our day? So I bring this up because, and that's where Alexis brings up a really key point here is sometimes no matter how much I plan, I feel like my day is running me. And I like that, you mentioned the top 2 must-dos versus the 8 would like to do's. There are things to where we have to look at what our to-dos are, how things get done, what are the priorities to do. Some people, what the big thing I want us to stress in this, and I'm seeing so much right now in this typing that's so important to recognize, is that we have to be able to know what our system truly is. You have to know what your system is. And everybody's system looks a little different. There are some people that are sticky note people. Who are my sticky note people? Who are my checklist people? Who are my calendar item people? And I will tell you, I am very much, and I'm going to hide a little bit of this because I don't want us to get in trouble for this. but I am a GSDer. So everything you see has checklists, crossouts, but it is my GSD list, which is my get stuff done list. And I am a huge fan of knowing that as my system. So the first piece of advice I'm going to give you when it really comes to solving tomorrow's problems today. And so in this case, I wanted to mention that as we find our system, it really is important to know what systems you have in place to create effectiveness in what you're trying to achieve. So I'm going to give you a few things that I do from a shared perspective, right? From a sort of approach perspective that I've seen from a long time and finding those sort of pieces. From a practical standpoint, one of the first pieces that I focus in on is I do, and I know some people, it may hurt your eyes, but I am a big fan, FYI, of being able to color code my calendar. And so in this case, my purple time is my time. And I put that in advance before anybody else can schedule it for me. And I do that because I want to treat myself with the same respect that I treat others. Now, the way that I color code it, and some people do this, is I break it down by departments. So if it's something that is red, that means like, hey, I'm off for a holiday, or hey, this is truly something so critically important that I have to take care of this. If it's something that is, orange, that's going to be my upper leadership, so that means like, hey, my bosses need something, so I really need to make sure we have that. So I'm a huge fan of categorizations. Yellow means I'm teaching or there's things going on there. Green is client calls. So if you have questions about classes and I can help answer those, I try to step in and help on those. So the first piece of this that I genuinely like from an email categorization is really setting up your categories appropriately. The second thing that I like to do is I am a massive fan of Inbox Zero. Has anybody ever heard of Inbox Zero by chance? So in this case, the reason why I like to bring this up is because if there's something that I know I've taken care of, I can move it to particular folders and get it out of the way. So and some are like, this is Microsoft, by the way, this is Microsoft Outlook, but I am a big fan of, and I will tell you that the practice of this is huge, is that whenever we go through this, I treat my emails as if they are the tasks that I need to stay on top of or the projects I need to stay on top of. So as things funnel in, and I promise you I don't have 6 items in here. If I go to my sent items, they're going to be somewhere upwards of closer to about 16,000, right? But we need to make sure that we have a system in place that allows us to navigate what is going to help us to be more productive. So in some cases, that may mean that, hey, in this case, I want to go ahead and make rules in this case. Or I want to go ahead and make sure that, and I see that there's a CC inbox for second priority reading that Jeff has. Whatever that looks like, I want you to be able to start thinking about how am I maximizing the effectiveness and efficiency of my day? Now, in order to do this, ladies and gentlemen, what this means we have to really consider doing is as follows. And categorizing emails is also an effective measure. What I typically like to do is this. How many of us feel like we are firefighters? How many of us feel like we are firefighters? When we run into the dynamics of sort of the firefighting piece, I ask 3 major questions, especially if I'm putting out the same fires over and over and over again. I really pay attention to 3 major questions. The first question I really look at is, yes, it will be, Raphael. Yes, it really is. The video is recording right now. So in this case, one of the things I pay attention to is there anything within my system I could do to eliminate fires from happening again? So I will tell you that one fire one fire that really, really hurt me in a lot of places is I would have so many people. How many of you get pinged with messages left and right through Teams chats or Slack chats or other types of chats? Anybody want to take a guess how many a day I get? Well, not how many I used to get. I now get probably about 5 to 10 a day. I used to probably have about 100 or so. Yes. And the way that I have, yes, and Pearl, I'm sure you're thinking, how the heck did you do that? How I did that was anytime I communicate with people what my strategy is that if you need anything from me, I have given you access to my shared calendar. And what that means is that if there's something you need from me, you put a spot on my calendar, it exists for you. You don't even have to ask me, hey, I see that you're open. Can I schedule this? No, don't even do that. And Pearl, my view is that if you need something from me, I want to give things you're absolutely right, Pearl. You're completely right on this. And not everything needs a meeting. But for me, if there's something that you need from me, that I have to provide expertise, information, certain things of that nature, I don't believe in wasting time. I want to come in prepared for your dialogue. And if that means you schedule a 15-minute block and we're out of there in 10 minutes, then that's perfect. But my view is that I never like to come to a dialogue empty-handed. That was a proactive system that I tried to build in this case. And that's where if teams are like, hey, are you free? It's hard to consistently say, no, I'm in the middle of a webinar. And Pearl, you might be, oh, Pearl, only if only, right? Maybe we're almost at that point. But in the meantime, if I don't have that, what I want to do is really prioritize my time to really prepare for the effectiveness of this dialogue. So that is one thing I've done is that if people need something from me, and I like that Kevin's going to say, I've tried to approach meetings with this in mind, right? And it is something that my view is that if you schedule this, I really want you to be considerate. I want you to make sure you've looked for an answer first, because that is normally one of the first questions that I come up with when people need something from me is, what have you already tried? What have you already brought to the table? What have you already discussed? What have you already done? And if the answer is, well, no, I wanted to go to you first, the answer is, well, here, I'd like for you to go give this a shot and go do this, and then we can circle back. So mutual expectation and accountability, as long as it is done with kindness and transparency, is an effective approach to prioritize your time when it comes to other people. And I like that, Kevin, right? It's to bond, to decide, to learn, to do. And I agree, Lynette, you have to do this or else you're putting the load and the weight on my shoulder, which then just enables the behavior that I'll take on all of your problems. And so that is not my mission to do so. So that shared calendar and the enforcement of that shared calendar has really eliminated that fire of Teams questions left and right. Now, not all fires are going to be eliminated. So the second thing I look for is, what are things I can do to reduce or control the size of the fire? And what that means is, if I go to inbox zero, I can tell you, do you know how many times I've achieved actual inbox zero in the last 2 years? I've achieved it 3 times in the last 2 years. 3 times. And when they happen, I will tell you, it's like a state of euphoria. It's like the greatest day ever. It's like, and normally when it happens, it's like we're heading into a holiday or it's like the end of the year, right? And don't be, and Joyce, I want to stress this, don't be embarrassed by what's in your inbox, because here's the thing. It is really important that make progress. Look for the progress, right? And then somebody sends you an email and you're like, well, at least it lasted. I will tell you though that it's not about the mission of zero. It really is much more about I want to make sure that if something is in my inbox, it is truly something that I need to stay on top of. So that is the mission behind it. So that's how that fire rarely ever gets eliminated. But I have it truly reduced and controlled, and it makes life a lot more manageable. Oh, Derek, that person reminds me of my wife. My wife has so many unread emails, it makes my head spin. Yes. And look, if that's the system, that's the system. I'm just saying, I try to find systems that are also like really effective. So if I can't reduce or control the size of the fire, the other question I'm going to ask is what are things I can do with my system to extinguish fires faster? This is where whenever I said, if you set up a meeting with me and you haven't done your due diligence, I'm sending that fire back to you until we've discussed it. And Joyce, I love the prioritization at least, right? You're prioritizing your system. That's the point. So when I extinguish fires, sometimes what that means is we have an all hands on deck. Sometimes things happen. Hey, we lost Zoom a couple times. Sometimes that's the nature of the beast. What systems do you have in place to get things up faster? So I will tell you, any meeting, here's something I do to extinguish fires faster. If I'm ever in meetings and something to where I may need to hop out and hop in or something like that occurs, what I do instead is I actually keep the meeting invite right in a separate link and I have it ready. So in case if anything happens, I'm ready to hop in, do what I need to, and I'm there. I can be present, be visible, take care of what I need to, shift. There are ways you can expedite your approaches. And the beauty of this system with being Smokey the Bear and not just the firefighter is that it allows you to have much more control over the way you manage your day. It allows you to be more preventative so that you're not running into the same fires over and over again. That's what makes it effective. Now, that's a system, that's a philosophical approach we have to take in our mind. Is are we running through these sets of questions to say, look, what fires am I repeatedly running into? How can I eliminate it? And that's the thing, yes, Marie, is that we want to make sure that we're doing this before the fires kick up again. We want to really make sure that we do this. So here's another system that I get into when it comes to that proactive Smokey the Bear solution. Has anybody ever heard of CBT or chunk block tackle? Chunk block tackle by chance? Okay, so quite excellent. So this is perfect. And no worries, and Ron, I love that you've heard it. That's awesome. One of the things that I really try to do with chunk block and tackle is how many of you feel like you have massive projects and it's like, I don't even know where to begin, or maybe I know where to begin, but I don't even know how to like make this so that I can hit this deadline. This seems daunting. It might seem overwhelming. It might seem exhausting. How many of you run into those? We might run into those from time to time, right? Perfect. So what I do in this case is I set up the following, and I'm going to give some real examples of where we do this. We have some exciting things coming down the horizon with Educate 360. I love the growth in which we're moving. We're doing so many good things, and we have a really cool surprise kind of heading towards the end of July. I can't wait. I can't reveal it now. Super excited. But I will tell you, it's been a long and daunting 6 to 8 month process in what we've done. And so what I've done is I've sectioned off things into chapters. How do you all eat an elephant? How do you all eat an elephant? That is the exact right answer, is one bite at a time. If you said y'all are eating elephants, okay, then we might need to do this. But we have to look at this from one area, right? And a vegetarian. I love that. So in this case, I bring this in because I want to make sure that we can chunk pieces of this. So the way that I chunk things out from an operational process is number one, I went through sort of what products do we need to go through with this exciting new release that we need to be mindful of. And I chunked out all of the products that we had first, that we had to take a look at, that we had to review, that we had to check, that we had to update, that we had to make sure we've assigned to people, that we had to check products first. The next thing we've gone into is what marketing pieces need to come into play. So I went to a marketing efficiency and we started scheduling tasks with marketing, having updates on directs, redirects, things like that. What blog material, what webinar material, what things do we need to bring into play to make it effective? The next thing that we went into was starting to get to an operations construct. How is some of the things we need to break up? What decisions, what dialogues, what meetings, what projects need to be taken care of for an operations standard? And so I chunked those pieces up and we had segments on that on what needed to be taken care of. And every single one of these, I had responsibility or hands in those things to make sure that those items get done. After operations was sales and sales enablement. There's things salespeople need to know. And so, how are we setting up the right educational standards with them? How are we making their conversations more comfortable with you all and making sure that they can speak life into it? So, what I did was I determined every aspect of the project. I really did a full brain dump. David Allen calls this a decluttering, if you will. There's many different authors in this space that really focus on clearing the mind, really breaking down and getting as many items out as possible, and then putting them in little categories, putting them in chunks. Some people say, does it have to be 15 minutes? It can be 30. People use the Pomodoro method, which is the 25-minute, then take a 5-minute break. Whatever that system is, the goal is they have to be done in the segments that can be achieved. You have to determine where your breaks can be made. So I'm a huge fan of chunking, first and foremost. Chunking is taking a giant rock and smashing it into the pebbles to create better organization, to make things fit. Once I do this, I block out my times well in advance. Well in advance. I already have things for next Thursday already at the ready. For the next stage of where we're heading. I already have them ready. And so what I do is I look at those rocks and pebbles and I schedule time around those. Another things that I do is that I actually write myself what is called self agendas. How many of you love a good agenda for your meetings? It's pretty neat how that works, right? So in this case, if I may, these were things, and I'm going to just remove the client name for a minute on these if we can. But I'm going to show you this in just a moment, is I wrote down little notes for myself on the approaches that we can take. And here it is. So this was the agendas. And I wrote down sort of segment and blocks. Now, I've gotten myself to the point where I can have 2 hours. Now, I might be interrupted, but even within this, this was a 30-minute segment. This was a 30-minute segment in what we were trying to achieve. This was a 30-minute segment as far as tying in the scopes. This was breaking up a different framework with what we were trying to do. We wanted to try to make sure we had these broken in. And I set that time aside for myself and ensured that we had all of those ducks in a row. So I'm somebody that I really try to, and Brooke, I love that we have that. Now, does it have to be that elaborate? No, but that was a 2-hour block that I really wanted to give myself that time to really dedicate and be off grid and really work on that. So yes, I was a little bit more detailed there, where in other cases, I wasn't. Sometimes I will give myself 15 minutes and I'm going to write 3 quick things that I want to get done. The last part is very important. There are no interruptions, no breaks. I close windows. And I don't mean just closing the window in my room. I mean, I'm closing windows on my screens. That 15 minutes, I don't exist to the planet. Some people say, do you want timer? You can. If you think it's going to push you into a better direction, great. If it's something that isn't, great. But most importantly, your goal is you have to go uninterrupted. You would be surprised how long 15 minutes really gets you to be in this case. It makes a tremendous, tremendous difference in what can be achieved there. What are your thoughts on chunk, block, and tackle? What do you think this does for you? Number one, it does create total focus. I like that some people really like it. It does. It removes a sense of overwhelming. It really does help prioritize. It does help with sanity. It gives more strategy. I really like this. It is systematic, Nathaniel. I really like this. Is that sometimes what happens, the biggest challenge that happens is that we can't get these monsters out of our minds and we have to get them out in front of us. The sooner we can get things out in front of us, the more quickly we can work through those. And yes, Ron, I would absolutely agree. If you ask me how productive I am in using this as a strategy versus what I used before, it is significantly higher. I love these responses, folks, and I'm glad that you're finding benefit in it as well. All right, and that leads me to the next question. How do you decide what to do yourself versus what to hand off to others? Ooh, delegation. If it takes me longer to explain it than to do it, which Rebecca can, I love that because sometimes it can be, well, it's just easier for me to do it. And then we have to do 28,000 things, right? And then we're like, wait a minute. All right, wait. Maybe there is something we might be able to do here. Right? Yes. So if I may share one funny story, the first time, so I have 4 daughters, as I mentioned, and one of my daughters, I taught her how to start doing her own laundry at about 10, almost 11 years old, right? About 10 years old. And I really walked her through it. I did like an I do, we do, you do approach. Not I dip, you dip, we dip. If anybody lived in the early 90s, like that's not what I'm talking about there. I mean the I do, we do, you do. Sorry, that's my cheesy dad joke for the hour. I went through and I taught her how to do it. And then I said, it's your turn to do it. And she did it and completely flooded with suds. The whole laundry was just flooded with suds, right? In this case, what ended up happening was I could have done 2 things. I could have just said, give it to me. I'll do it, right? I'll do it. And then what I said instead was, do you know what? Let's get it right. Let's get it right. There are just some things that we truly have to pull in Elsa, ladies and gentlemen, and we have to let it go. We have to let it go. Oh, double time sneak attack on that one. We do. We have to let things go and look through the things that we can let go. So how we decide to do this is truly what I do through an Eisenhower matrix. The Eisenhower matrix is where I really focus on these 4 quadrants. If something is truly urgent, and maybe not, and Alexis, I really love this, that based on position, I might not do this, but there may be things that if it's teamwork, I might say, hey, you're really savvy in this case. You're really strong in this case. I seem to have this go over and I can do this. It could also be collaborative in approach rather than just here's delegation, take this off my plate, right? And so really good point there. I like this. And the other thing that I'm seeing is that April, we have to know ourselves too, right? Sometimes it's easier for us to fall on the sword. Sometimes we want to help others too much, and we do. And Michael, yeah, that's why we have to give them the tab. So in this case, here's how I try to strategize this. If it is something that is truly urgent and truly important, and we really have to define what both of those are. In this case, I do. I do it. And we have to, and we have to do it, Aaron. Aaron says we urgent important. I have to take it myself. And that is exactly right. In that case, is we have to take it ourselves. So urgent and important for me are things that are larger scale vision items, growth of a program. I do larger keynotes. So I do a lot of our larger keynotes. I'm in front of the large crowds where I have a team full of people that do their own workshops and their own approaches, right? That's where the urgent and important determines by size, by need, and by true what can truly grow this side of our operation. Many of us are very good about knowing what our urgents and important are. The next thing we have a tendency to do, though, is we go to the things that are fires that are urgent but not important. And instead, what we really need to be doing is mapping out things proactively to really decide what goes on our calendar, what needs to be where. We have to look for the things that are important that might not be due now, but we have to decide and get that out there and say, look, when is this going to be done? And then we have to put that time block on that calendar to commit to it. So this is typically the one I love to put a star at because this normally gets overrun by the urgent but not important. And then we're taking care of everybody else and everybody else's needs. And this needs taken care of, and this needs taken care of, and this needs taken care of. And then all of a sudden, the one thing we forgot was the things that's really important. And the problem with this is now not only is it important, but now it also becomes urgent. And when this is too high, we get way too overwhelmed. That's why we really need to take care of this. We need to make decisions on when we're taking care of these things. When are we taking care of them? The urgent but not important. This is where we delegate. This is where we delegate. And what I mean by delegate, sometimes we don't have the positional authority to delegate, but this is also where, and I'll give an example of delegation. There is another person, Mariella's boss is a pretty higher up, and she is wonderful in every way. She's actually sat in on a couple webinars before. Her name's Tiffany. She's equally as important. So I can't sit there and be like, hey, Tiffany, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. That's not how it works. So in this case, what I do instead is I strategize with her and we sort of delegate to each other. What are things that I need to take care of? What are things you need to take care of? So for our brand pages or our webinars or our blogs, I will write the content pieces of it, and that will be what she delegates to me. And there's other things that I delegate to her, which is, look, I need to know what the big picture, the scope of a website looks like. I need to know what this is going to look like. So we actually delegate, we co-delegate to each other. So even if you don't have positional authority, you can still find things to move off of your plate to somebody else, but it might mean that you're taking on something you have more expertise and understanding in, that which then knows that you can make it truly important. If it's not urgent and it's not important, we have to delete it for the time being. And I don't want us to think that check-ins are very, very important. I do mean that. I actually put that as important but not urgent. So I decide when I'm going to check in with people. I actually put markings on that. But yeah, parking lot items might not be there. The other things that I might put as not urgent, not important. I love my HR people. I mean this. I don't want anybody to think whenever I say this. But like, we had a vacation. Like, when are our days off for our holidays? Okay, good to know. I'm not going to need to know it until we get closer to it. So I'm going to delete it out of my mind for the time being. I'm going to archive it. I'm going to reference it. I'm going to have it in a place that's a repository I can go back to later. So when I mean delete, I don't mean just hitting the delete button. I mean deleting it out of your mind for the time being. This is the approach that I take whenever I'm really working through what things I need to take versus what things do others need to take versus what things are priority versus what things are not priority for me. And so, one final question I get in this that's pretty important is when we apply leadership, this will be the last thing I teach you today. Ask yourself these questions. What level does my work need to be focused on? What level does my work need to be focused on? And what that means is that there's some things that I need to do that are truly task focused. Like I might need to build out scopes of work for people. Okay, I'm going to get tasks done. I'm going to make sure I'm meeting deadlines. Those are things that I need to do, but that's not what just occupies my time day in and day out. If I only did that, we'd lose a lot of visionary approaches in the way we're moving. So there's some times to where I have to be level 1 in my cases. And this is truly what we call GSD mode. This is your get stuff done. I need to get X done. These are going to be things that make small chunks and movement, but over time, they really add up. So for me in my business, it's scopes of work. It might be getting to content development a little bit, making content updates to things. Sometimes that's where that needs to be done. The next piece of this that goes up is how many of us need to work on the way we're delegating and working with people. This is a people-focused initiative. This is the coach and communicator, which means, and I appreciate that you all are liking this is where I'm going to have to put time with people. So this is going to be where I consider check-ins, and we teach a lot of courses in this tier 2 space. Strategic and mastering meaningful engagement, extending influence, really understanding how to tap in to make more meaning with people. So this is where I strategize. Who are members on my team that really don't want me to check in very often? Who are the people that do? Who are the people that want me to make time for them? Who are the people that want me to save them time? Who are the people that like autonomy? Who are the people that like collaboration? What strengths do they have? I have to spend some time in the mapping, and you'll notice I actually spend more time in that than I do in just the GSD mode. So really, we want to focus on strategic time in the way that we work with people. That's level 2. Ultimately, from an idealistic standpoint, where we really want to spend most of the team is where we are heading. It is truly what is known as transformation. One thing I love about our whole business is that as Educate 360 is we are the partners of digital transformation, meaning we are consistently looking for tomorrow. We are anticipating customer needs. We are finding patterns in approaches. We're finding true patterns in what events need to be. What are the amount of students that seem to be effective? What consistent questions are we asking? We're really spending a lot more time in the continuous improvement space. And that is where I think the shaping of our business is really skyrocketing because we're focusing on what transformative approaches we can work for tomorrow. So in my case, this is true breakdowns of a business. This is finding true strategic planning. This is getting into those higher level things. Now, to others, it may look different, but we need to have time for future focused thinking. I can't stress how much of importance that is. So, in the last 8 to 9 minutes, I want to make sure that I leave room for questions and answers.
Awesome. I will give our audience a little bit of time.
Christopher mentions Chris Saliza. No, I'm going to have to look that person up. I appreciate that, Chris. I'm going to check that out. Thank you for getting that link. Mariella, if you can, I want to have this link, this chat available for me so I can take a look at that afterward, please.
Yeah, absolutely. We have
Excellent.
another one that came in, another question that came in. How do you recommend extinguishing fires when upper management constantly blows other people's fires in my yard because they are
Mm.
misdirecting responsibilities slash ownership rather than confronting the people that actually started the fires and keep feeding them?
Yeah, Alexis, such a good question there. One of the things I like to say about this is um, when upper management blows fires, and I will tell you that even the kindest and best ones, I love who I work for. I have no shame in saying it. I absolutely love who I work for. There are times she blows the fire into my yard. And sometimes when that happens, what I have a tendency to do is I ask for clarification of priority. And I set realistic expectations with this, Alexis, is most people will say, well, I need this ASAP or I need this ASAP. Well, one thing that I do is a little bit of a verbiage state. And now she's going to know that this is a trick I use. So I promise I move this for all good purposes. I say, I know that ASAP means as soon as possible. Realistically, from a true deadline perspective, when do you really need this by? And I will beat it. So I always say in this case that I always let them dictate what the true, I point them back to the true deadline. And what it does is it gets them to think about, okay, realistically, I need this by end of day tomorrow. And now what I've done is I've bought myself about 2 days of time and I can reprioritize what my calendar looks like. So whenever I do that, I normally try to set meaningful expectations on that end. Now, if there's things to where they're going to the wrong people for the fire, what I typically try to do, and this is a little bit more tiresome up front, but I will say, I think we need to have a quick meeting with all of us, with the four of us, just to make sure that, and I use this term, ready? So that we're all aligned in the way that we're moving. And what I'm really saying in that is, I want to make sure that we're not running into this fire again. So that's the way I'm saying it to them is I want to make sure we're all aligned on this. So I'd like to get a touch base with the five of us to go through this, just so that I make sure we're all aligned. And what you're really doing is you're ensuring that we're not misdirecting or refiring things over to other people where it doesn't belong. Does that help, Alexis? Those are two strategies. I take one of each. Excellent. Yeah, Jennifer, alignment is such a key word. I also use a lot of we language. I teach this in another course, but I use a lot of we language instead of here's what you're doing and here's what I'm doing. Hey, I want to see the best way we can approach this. I want to see the best way where we can meet our deadline. So, what does that look like? So, I use a lot of we language.
Excellent. We had another question really quickly here. I saw one earlier too about the recording or slides. We will be sending the recording in an email after the webinar. So be on the lookout for that if you weren't able to attend the full session. And I believe that looks like about it. I thought we had another question, but I think we should be all good to go. So if you guys need any more info on this topic, please do not be afraid to visit us at newhorizons.com. And if you missed out on any of the session again, we'll be sending that recording. So thank you so much, Dr. J. Fantastic insight for all of our audience. And
One question I did get is, does this count towards PDU? Yes, this would count as a power skill. If you're going through PMI, this counts as a 1 hour PDU for that. Yes.
that's right. Get that 1 hour credit in that PDU and definitely list our webinar. Thank you so much again, Dr. J. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week and we'll see you soon. Bye.